So let's do an example that's a little bit more closely related to this question that we started off the chapter with of what happens when people start earning more money. And so we can do a very similar uh, uh, example where we're thinking about how much people work when we think about what wage they make, okay? And so in this case, our wage is just $15 an hour. And so imagine that you have a job, your boss says, hey, you can work as much or as little as you want, you'll get paid $15 an hour, right? It's a little bit unrealistic, but not too unrealistic. And so our feasible set in this case goes from 24 hours of free time, so 0 hours of work, and zero income, which means that you can consume nothing. And for every additional hour that we work, we get $15 of income, and so we can consume $15, right? We're not thinking about consuming versus saving here. We'll talk about that later. And we'll imagine that you can work up to a maximum of 16 hours per day, in which case you get 16 times 15, which is $240 of income or consumption. So the equation for the budget constraint, right? So C is our budget constraint. It's just the wage, in this case 15, times 24. That's how many days, how many hours there are in a day, minus T, where T is the amount of time you work. And so that just gives us our budget constraint, right? That's the line right there. Now, the indifference curves tell us, all right, well, how much are we willing to trade off an hour of free time for however much consumption? And so here we have two indifference curves drawn in. So we have indifference curve 1 and indifference curve 2. And obviously, we're looking for that indifference curve that is just tangent to the budget constraint, right? And so the budget constraint is always going to have the same slope. In this case, it's just going to be 15 because that's the wage that you get. Every extra hour of work, you get $15 of income or consumption. And so we want to find the one that's just tangent to the budget constraint and so has a slope of 15. And so here, the marginal rate of substitution, that's the slope of the indifference curve, is just equal to the wage, which is the same in this case as the marginal rate of transformation. It's in this case, we're transforming an hour of free time into consumption. We're saying, okay, we give up the hour of free time, we turn it into an hour of work. That hour of work gives us the wage of 15. We take that $15 and we spend it on consumption, and so that's our marginal rate of transformation. So we have two important effects here, right? We have one effect is that a change in the slope of the budget will change the budget constraint, right? And that means that we could have the same amount of income holding our working hours fixed, but also that our opportunity cost of free time increases. Now, if our wage goes up, now we could say, all right, well, I could get the same income by working less, or I could have more income by working more. That's what we're going to call the income effect. But I also think, oh gosh, now instead of $15 an hour, I get 16 or 17 or $18 an hour. That means that every extra hour I spend sitting on the couch, I'm giving up more money, right? And so that's what we call the substitution effect, that higher opportunity cost. And so let's see what happens in our example. So we can change these effects, right? And so as we'll see, we're going to increase the wage, and that's going to lead to two different effects. First, we're going to look at the income effect. And so the income effect is the change in the optimal choice when income changes, right? Keeping the opportunity cost fixed. And so the way we look at that is that we just shift up our budget constraint to the new point and say, all right, well, in that case, the wage is the same, and so what happens to hours worked, right? And so a wage increase gives more income per hour worked. And so the incentive in this case is to decrease working hours, right? So I can say, all right, well, I can work less, but still get the same amount of income. That's how I think of the income effect. And so that decreases the amount of working hours. The other effect is the substitution effect, right? The substitution effect is the change in optimal choice because of the higher opportunity cost. And so that is going to tend to increase the amount of hours worked because that higher opportunity cost says, oh, I really shouldn't be sitting on the couch. I should really be working and earning more money, right? And so In both cases, you get higher income, but the substitution effect means you work more, you have fewer hours of free time instead of working less. And so we can combine these two effects into the total effect, which is actually going to depend on the shape of the indifference curves. And so here in this example, right, we start at point A. That was with our $15 per hour of work. And then we can see that our income effect, which keeps that slope constant, so it's still 15, but just gives us more income, decreases the amount of hours worked, only a little bit, right, going from A to C. But the substitution effect gives us more hours worked. And so the overall effect is the sum of the two. So in this case, right, we actually work more because of the higher wage. So we go from point A to point D, we work more, we get more income. And which effect dominates depends on individual preferences. And so if I feel like, oh, I'd rather have more free time, then the income effect is going to dominate. Or if I feel, oh, I'd rather have more income, then the substitution effect is going to dominate. And we can draw those indifference curves depending on the slope of the indifference curves, the marginal rate of substitution. We can draw them either way to have either the income effect dominate or the substitution effect dominate. In this case, it's the substitution effect that is dominating.